Okay, so this is another video in my Excel 102 series. We're going to talk about frequency and histograms. I strongly recommend that you get the free Excel workbook at divideandconquermath.com. Just go to the stats section, you'll find it there. So just FYI, in this series, I've had 4 different videos, and so this is the last video on frequency and histograms. So I kind of assume that you know the rest of this material here before you watch this one. But anyways, I'm just going to get right into it. So I'm on the 4th tab here for frequency and histograms, and so I have here 250 data points with height. So how to make a frequency chart and a histogram chart, there's a couple ways to do it, but I'll show you some of the faster ways. So the fastest thing that you can start with is a histogram. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of my data, and so I've got 250 data points here. And I can actually just make a histogram straight off of Excel. So if I come up here to recommended charts, I go to insert and then recommended charts. One of these options is a histogram. And so if we click OK, so boom, there's a histogram. Now, there are a few things about this that we should talk about. So first of all, so this is going to be, maybe we'll just change the title to height frequency. So you can just double click on the title to change it to whatever you want. So this graph is kind of ugly, right? Because it has like these longer like decimals in here. So what can we do about that? So you can play around with the histogram. So if I go to, I clicked on this axis where these numbers are, I right click on it, and then I go to format axis at the bottom. So when I go to format axis, it shows me all these different things that I can do. And specifically what I want to do is right now I want to mess with the number. So if I go down here to where it says category, so yours might say general right now. I was playing around with this earlier, so I think Excel stored it. But what I want to do is I want to go to number. And so when I click number, so you can see here actually that now this is showing me how many decimal places to show. And now you can see that this histogram already looks a lot more usable and a lot better. So let's see, I'm actually going to make it like 1 decimal spot. So let's see. So now it's, I don't like how that looks. I liked it better with 2. So we'll go back to 2. Okay, so now I can see I've put in 2 decimal spots, but you can play around with this, right? And you can just see the different ways that it will display that graph. So that is one way that we can format this. Now, the other thing that comes with histograms is, so histograms are just taking all of your data and like making like little bins or buckets to dump it into. And so like as far as like how wide do these different bins go, that's totally up to you. So if you look under here under access options, you can see that you can either select here the bin width or the number of bins. So if I don't want 10 bins, if I want 8 bins, so if I click off of this, boom, now it changes it, right? But it made the whole graph look different, and I don't like how this axis looks, so then I would probably mess around with it a little bit. Or if I wanted, say, 12 bins, I could switch that up here, and now I can see kind of how it looks. So histograms, like as far as how they look, it really just depends on how you set up the bins, which is an important thing to note because you can kind of manipulate how the data looks depending on the number of bins that you have. Right, 12 bins looks very different than having 10 bins, right? Just an observation. So this is one really quick way that you can make a histogram if that is all that you need. And at least you can kind of see where the data is concentrated around. You can see it's concentrated in these points, and then you can do whatever analysis you want on your data. Now, what if I actually want a frequency chart? Well, this is going to be a little trickier now. There's a couple ways to make a frequency chart. So if I want to make a frequency chart, let's see, I think I'll put this over here for now so it's not bothering us. Okay, so frequency. So if you want an actual breakout of a frequency chart, you are going to have to create your own bins. And so part of coming up with your bins are to know what are the minimum and the maximum values, which we can easily find using Excel formulas. So I can use the min formula on my data, and then I can use the max formula on my data. Boom, boom. And okay, so there's my minimum, there's my maximum. And so from here, I can also just take the difference between them. So this is going to be this, the highest value minus the lowest value. So I can kind of see what that difference is. And then from there, I can decide to set my bin width. So I'm just going to take what that difference was and then divide it by the number of bins I want. So as far as like how many bins you want, like that is totally just a preference, right? So if I want to do 10 bins, so this would be my bin width. Okay, so now the other thing that we want to do is we want to kind of create cutoff points for the bins. So what I'm going to do is I want to take a value that is just slightly below the minimum. And as far as that idea of like what does slightly below mean, it's kind of arbitrary, like it's kind of whatever you decide it is. So I am just going to subtract minus 0.5 because then that definitely means that this minimum will fall into this cutoff, okay? So I've got this cutoff here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create more bins using this as my starting point. And again, I'm using this as my starting point to make sure that what I know is my minimum value will fall into the right spot. Okay, so what I'm going to do is now I'm going to just use an Excel formula. So I'm going to take this plus my bin width. So here is my bin width. Now the other thing that I want to do with the bin width, and I have a whole other video that I'm going to make on this about locking things, but what we're going to do is we're going to put a $sign in front of where I'm referencing that bin width. So for me, my bin width is here at E6. So I'm going to put $signs around the E and the 6, so you can just adjust your formula accordingly. But what that's going to do is it's going to allow me to drag this formula. So look at how this is being referenced now. It's taking the previous value, which was this D9, plus the bin width, right, the orange cell. And so what that's going to do now is now I can come here to where I can drag this formula. I'm just going to drag it down. I've actually dragged it too far, right? This is my maximum value. So the last value that I need here is this 74.44. So here are all the cutoffs that I'm going to use for my bins. Okay, and so these don't look as nice, right, as like these values here, right? This has a really clear where does it stop, where does it end. That is like really clear here. So I will talk about how do you do that, or like how do you make it look nicer in a second. It's kind of a manual process, but anyways, just to show you kind of how Excel is going to work with this. So there's a couple ways now on how we can create our frequency table. So probably the easiest way is to use data analysis. So if you go to the data tab, you should see this data analysis thing here. Now, if you don't have this, I need to show you where this is at. So you actually have to tell Excel to add this. So if you don't have that, you can go to the file and then go to options. And then you're going to go over here to where it says add-ins. And where it says manage Microsoft add-ins, you'll click go. And then you should see this analysis tool pack. And so you want to have that checked. I also use VBA. If you don't know what that is, you don't have to worry about it, but you want to have this analysis tool pack checked. So once you hit OK on that, it should show you the data analysis. And the data analysis tool is super cool because this has a whole bunch of like statistics tests in it that are just like, it's just a really powerful tool. So what we have here now is if I look through all of the options, so you can see that I have a histogram option. Okay, so we're going to click on that and we're going to click OK. And okay, so now I need to have what is my input range. So I was playing around with this earlier, so I've got values that are already stored. So for my input range, so my input range are what are all my data. So these are all my data points, so I do that. And then it says what is the bin range. Okay, so for the bin range, so I'll just delete this out for a second. So for the bin range, I will click on this arrow here, and then I will just select all of this data for my cutoff bins. And then when I want to get off of this, I just click right here. Now, in my data selections, so just to show you them one more time, so when I click on this, so you can see that I chose B1. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. So I have, get rid of that. So I start here at B1, so that includes a label. And then also when I selected my bin range, I selected the cutoff bins. So those are my labels. So I also checked labels so that Excel knows to ignore the top entry because it's a label. And now for the next part of this, It's asking for an output. So this is now asking, where do you want me to put all this information? So once again, so I'll just click on this little arrow here. You can click anywhere on your worksheet where you want the data to go. So I'm just going to click there. You can literally click anywhere, but this is an output range in your workbook. Okay, and from here, let's see. You've got some of these other options. So we could do like a Pareto, cumulative chart output. We can just click all of those just to see what they're going to do. So from here, I'm going to hit OK. Okay, so this is kind of one of the interesting things that happens with the data analysis tool pack. So let's see. I'm going to expand these columns. Okay. So you can see now it used the cutoff bins that we created. And so basically now what it's doing is it's saying, so from this value to this value, there were 4 data points. From this value to this value, there were 7 data points. So it is creating that like frequency with those like different buckets. And so with all those other things that we checked, it also just automatically calculated the cumulative frequency, so the percentage. And then it also did the whole chart backwards because why not? And then you can also see over here that it has aligned everything. But the goofy thing is, so it actually did this as a Pareto chart. So, oops, didn't mean to do that, sorry. So as a Pareto chart, stop it. Okay, as a Pareto chart, so look at the axis here. So what a Pareto chart does is a Pareto chart actually goes from largest to smallest. So this is like a really strange way to make a histogram. It just depends on like what it is that you're doing with your histogram as to whether you'd want a Pareto chart, but given the way that we have our data, this doesn't make sense. So if you are ever playing around with the analysis tool pack, you can always just rerun your whole test. So it keeps all your data from before, and I am just going to uncheck Pareto. We do not want that. And let's see, I'll hit OK now. And it's going to say this will overwrite the existing data. That's totally fine. I'm running the exact same test. All right, and now I can see here, here's my histogram. And this histogram looks very similar. Let's see if we can compare them. These histograms now look somewhat similar. I actually don't want to have this cumulative frequency, so I'm just going to delete that. And so now I've got my histogram here. Now, which histogram do you like better? I actually like the histogram that the insert function makes better. But as far as like from a frequency chart, if that's what I need, then this is what I have to use. So this is one way that you can make a frequency chart. You can use the data analysis way, and I think this is maybe a slightly more intuitive way, but there is one other way that you can make a frequency chart if that's what you need. So the other way to make a frequency chart is, so I'm actually gonna, there's a formula for it. So you have to have, it depends on what version of Excel you have as to how the frequency formula is gonna work. So if you have a newer version of Excel, which I'd strongly recommend that you get, so what you're gonna do is you're gonna use the frequency formula. And it's asking for what is my data array. So I just tell it where's all the data, right there. And then it says what's the bins array. So where are all the bins? So here's all the cutoffs, right? So I just gather all that. So the cool thing with the frequency formula is, so watch this, when I hit enter, it now has filled everything in. And you can see that it has the same values here in this formula as it does down here, right? So they're the exact same. Now, in the event that you entered in the frequency formula and it did nothing, that probably means you have an old version of Excel, so I would recommend that you consider updating. But what you can do is after you've hit enter, so I'll just show you. So if you did this and nothing happened, click on the formula bar and then hit Control-Shift-Enter, and then it should work for you. And the funny thing that's going to happen when you do that is, so you'll see here now, Excel added these little brackets here. So that's to indicate that it's like an array formula. And in older versions of Excel, this is like how you would have to do formulas like that. So it was, I'll just write it here, Control-Shift-Enter if the frequency formula didn't work for you. But it's the same and it's the same. So now I have these like cutoffs, and then there's kind of this like awkward thing though of like, does this make sense? Like how this is written? And so I don't think that this necessarily makes sense. So what I have a tendency to do, depending on what I'm doing with the data, if I am going to show somebody this data, I will take the time to make really clear-cut bins. So I'm going to have this, let's see, I'll do it to 2 decimals, 62.93 to 63.97. And then we'll call this 63.971 to 65.02, and then 65.021 to 66.07. And so I am now taking these numbers from up here. I am just like rounding off the values and making these really clear bins so that I can copy my frequency data and just paste it in here. And so this is another way that you can kind of do this. It is not a beautiful process. I will be the first to admit that, just to sit here and kind of type these numbers. But it does, you know, that is a way to just better display the data depending on what it is that you're doing with it. And so on and so forth. I'm not going to continue this here. So yeah, so at the end of the day, so what is the best way to really get your histogram and your frequency? I would say it is this chart here. But unfortunately, there's not like a nice way to display this data down here as bins unless you're using the recommended function or the recommended graph feature. So yeah, so we've gone through a couple different ways to find histograms, to find frequency, all that good stuff. So I guess we're done here. So that brings us to the end of this series. I do have more videos in this series. If you found this helpful, please consider hitting that like button, or feel free to leave me a comment or subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it at that, guys, and I hope to catch you guys in another video. Bye!